Content of consciousness. I thought we will talk about this today because it's important to understand the content of consciousness through which one gets to know what is the conflict that goes on because of this content, and therefore the resolution of that conflict, which results in the transformation of consciousness. What exactly is this content? The content is all that is there in terms of emotions, in terms of the thoughts that we use in our practical side of living, in terms of the intellect, in terms of thoughts which succeed the feelings or the emotions that we go through. So which means it is a whole vessel that contains several ingredients. On the emotional aspect, you have anxiety, concern, worry, ambition, drive, all of these things, hypocrisy, all of these things. In terms of intellect, it's a question of the application of knowledge which gets stored as memory, and that also occupies a large portion of this content of consciousness, whether it is the application that you use for your business, for your daily living, whether it is in terms of the housewife being able to recall the use of knowledge and memory for all her activities, or a businessman, or some doctor, or any professional, lawyer, what have you, who needs to recall the knowledge that is stored in the memory and be able to use that. Now, one is not so much concerned about the knowledge that is used for our daily routine, mundane existence. That is something that you can't do without. I mean, you can't do without possibly a cup of coffee in the morning, which needs to be prepared, for which some amount of knowledge is required. And so that information is got previously stored in the memory, which is recalled and then used for that particular activity. But what we are concerned is the psychological aspect of the content of consciousness. The whole bunch of emotional compartment of the vessel, as it were. Why should I remember if somebody has hurt me when I meet that person the next time? So is there a possibility that the insult or the hurt that one has taken in through the interaction with this person for the first time, or maybe the nth time, and then when this person is going to be met the next time, why should this hurt be remembered at all? Is there a possibility that this hurt can get dissolved, can get drained from the consciousness, wiped away from the content of consciousness? So which means if one is able to handle the psychological aspect of consciousness this way, where as an emotion or a feeling arises, the observation, the pure act of observation of that feeling itself gives the depth of understanding about the feeling in all its ramifications, its shape, its color, its texture, how it has arisen, why it has arisen. And the very observation of that naturally also dissolves this particular psychological aspect, which we took in this example as hurt. Similarly, anything, brutality, anger, violence, envy, the tendency to compare oneself with another, which is what triggers all of this actually. So whether you are a person who's young in age, or whether you're somebody who's middle-aged, whether you're somebody much older, at any point in time, if one is able to dissolve the psychological content of consciousness, then it leaves a large portion of the mind or the brain empty, which means the brain cells which were holding all of these undesirable emotions or feelings, if one can call it that way, or undesirable thoughts, if one is able to wipe it away or dissolve, then the brain cells themselves get renewed, they get reinvigorated, so they become fresh, which means an interaction with another human being after the dissolution of hurt will be something totally different and spontaneous from a scenario where you meet the person, the same person who has hurt you for the second time, and you carry the image of that hurt and you carry the image of that person, because of which the interaction is not complete, is not spontaneous, and therefore there isn't a right interaction or a right relationship between you and that person. Because just as you have carried an image or a memory of that hurt, the other person has also carried an image or memory or the fact that he or she has hurt you. And therefore, in the subsequent interaction, the relationship is between the images of these two people who are carrying this in their memory, and therefore through that screen they interact. Therefore, the interaction is not between two actual people, which is a totally different kind of an interaction where it's fresh, where it's green, where it is spontaneous. And that is where actually love and compassion is. Because what is, after all, love and compassion? Love and compassion is the right action in relationship. So do what you will. There is love if there is right action in relationship. And when there is right action, relationship takes on a new meaning, and your existence also operates in a different dimension. Qualitatively, there is a total transformational change. I'm just recalling this particular story at this point in time, which is to emphasize that not only is the content of consciousness all of what we said just now, there is also a whole bunch of concepts and ideas, ideations, goals, objectives, etc., which are very, very abstract in nature. Let me illustrate that with a very, very short story. A bird was somebody told the bird that, there is this dreamland, the fantasy world, a little far away, and if you fly steadily and possibly for a few days, you will get there. The bird got carried away and it said, okay, so let me start. But then the caveat or the catch to that was, whenever the bird asked the way to the fantasy land, it had to give away a feather to the person who was guiding the route, as it were. So the bird agreed and said, okay, that's fine, I have a lot of feathers, so that's fine, I will give it away. So it kept asking person after person, and then as they kept guiding, it had to give away the feathers. And then initially it wasn't a problem, and then the bird reached a point where the fantasy land is just a few meters or half a kilometer away. The bird said, at last I'm reaching this place. But by then the bird had lost all of its feathers, and then when it tried to fly, it drops. So it became a case of so near yet so far. So this dreamland or the fantasy land, as it were, is a conceptual thinking, and the bird was trying to progress towards that, little realizing that by the time it uses up all of this effort and strife and struggle and energy, it is never able to get there. So this is just to illustrate the point that we have built so many concepts, capitalism, communism, concepts in the political realm, concepts in the economic realm, concepts in the field of economics, concepts in the field of medicine, so many concepts, and then we make abstractions of all of the experiences that we have had in our endeavor, as it were, in existence, and then we turn all of them into theories and concepts, and then it gets far away from reality. And once we are not able to implement or execute this concept in the way we have thought through in our minds, then we feel that there is a flaw in the conceptualization, and then we come up with another concept. But unfortunately, no concept is going to be perfect, because they are all the production of thought. And thought, as we discussed even earlier, in the earlier videos, that there is a limitedness, if one can call it, to thought. Because of this limitedness and the fragmentary or the broken up or the divisive nature of thought, no concept that is created by thought is going to be picture perfect. It is not going to be whole, it is not going to be complete. So that is why you have communism with all its imperfections, capitalism with all its imperfections, any kind of ism. Take, for example, even the concepts that galore in the field of religion. I mean, whether that concept is 5,000 years old or 2,000 years old or 1,300 years old, they are still concepts. Some kind of an ideal that is there, some symbols, logos, or possibly idols, etc., fill up this particular concept, and then people would like to possibly, they believe that they are undertaking this path of realization through the use of all of this to get there, to get somewhere, possibly to go to heaven and sit near to God. But then nobody has seen God. So it remains by and large a concept created in the mind. After the mind has itself created the concept, the mind itself is trying to get there. So that sounds a little absurd, which means there is this tendency of thinking, which germinates in the mind, of course, to always escape from actuality, to always escape from reality, to move away from truth. And that's where the problem is. Having been attached to a person, to property, to an object, we want to be detached. And therefore the battle begins. Having got into a comparison mode, whether that a person who compares as a student who wants to score better marks, or whether it's a businessman who wants to rake in more money than the other businessmen next door, or whether it's somebody else who wants to buy a bigger car. All of this is comparison, and essentially this also kind of triggers this limitedness, as it were, of the conceptualization of the mind. So therefore there is a certain sense of incompleteness, therefore, in the psychological aspect of one's existence. Practical aspect is something that we will not get into, that you cannot touch at this point in time. It's something that is inevitable, it's something that is necessary, you can't do without. I mean, I can't, in today's world, you can't do without some level of use of gadgets, some level of advancement that is there in science and technology. They have all anyway happened. I mean, you can call it the necessary evil, but however it is there, you can't turn the clock back. You've already moved from the bullock cart to the jet age. So that's a given, technologically, the practical aspect of it. But the psychological aspect of it, we have more or less remained what we were as the cavemen. I mean, we have come from the apes, but we continue to behave like the same gorillas, the chimpanzees. Because it is these monkeys that you see them, fighting, being competitive, struggling, one-upmanship, war. They have their own mini battles, the fight for turfdom, all of this. It's exactly the same thing that is operating. The human mind has itself divided the world into a map, made it into a map, divided that, segregated that, stratified that into different countries, and made it into geographies, given them labels, names, etc. And then, having created these divisions, it is trying to look for safety and security in that division. If you have already divided it as India and Pakistan, if you have already divided it as America and Russia, China and Japan, then having divided, there is bound to be conflict after any division, and therefore how can you look for safety and security? So why did you divide it as India and Pakistan in the first place, and then to say that we are at war with Pakistan, or Pakistan says we are at war with India? I mean, there is going to be this eternal conflict so long as this division is there. So the psychological aspect of the content of consciousness, which then translates in action, in the form of wars, in the form of brutality, in the form of violence, and the whole bunch of, let's say, enmity that is there, and ill feeling and rancor that is there among human beings across geographies. Whether the geography is 5 meters away, who is your neighbor, or that is 5,000 miles away, somewhere in another far off place, but that is still there. This kind of an existence more or less saps the energy of the human mind. The human mind is completely enervated, exhausted, and is not able to think afresh anew about any encounter or a challenge. Therefore, any difficulty that is thrown as a challenge to a person, the normal tendency is not to, is only to think in terms of modifying this and then approaching it with a solution, but not something which is completely transformative and completely new. So we have seen therefore as to how this content of consciousness can really uh, put you down, metaphorically speaking, because of which it takes a toll on human relationship tremendously, which as I said before is the screens that are there between people. Therefore, in the next interaction, hopefully we'll try and see the necessity of emptying this unnecessary content of consciousness, and therefore if the psychological aspect is empty, then what is there? Is there a new dimension that one can discover?